Come closer. Not because it's safer here. It isn't. But because this one is documented, witnessed, written into city ledgers by men who had no reason to lie. Picture a narrow street in Strasbourg, the stone still holding the day's heat, and a woman named Frau Troffea stepping into the open square. She begins to dance. No music plays. Strasbourg in the summer of 1518 was not a place given to fever dreams. It was a free city of the Holy Roman Empire, walled, prosperous, governed by careful men who kept careful records. Its grain stores were watched, its guilds were ordered, its streets at that hour would have smelled of bread and river water and the ordinary business of a city that expected nothing strange to happen to it that day. Frau Troffea stepped into that street and began to move. Not a jig, not a celebration. Her arms rose and fell as if pulled by something above her. Her feet struck the stone again and again, and her face, this detail survives in more than one account, showed no pleasure at all. Hour became hour, evening came, and she did not stop. Night came, and she did not stop. Her neighbors watched from doorways and told themselves what people always tell themselves when a thing is too strange to name, that she would tire, that the body has limits, that surely one woman cannot outlast her own exhaustion. She danced through the next day, and the one after that. Her feet by then were no longer feet in any shape a physician would recognize, raw, split, bleeding into the stone she struck them against. And still she did not stop, and still no one could say why. By the second week, Frau Troffea was no longer alone. The chronicles disagree on numbers, as chronicles often do. But they agree on direction. The affliction was growing. A handful became dozens. Dozens over the following weeks, swelled toward what some records place near 400 souls, though the exact count is something historians still argue over, in rooms far quieter than that square ever was. There was no pattern to who fell. A blacksmith's apprentice, a grandmother, a child barely old enough to be trusted alone at the well, men and women both, young and old both, as though whatever moved through Strasbourg that summer had no preference at all, only appetite, and it did not look like joy. This is the detail that unsettles historians most, the one that survives across multiple independent witnesses. The dancers' faces were slack, their eyes fixed on something no one else could see, their bodies working like machinery left running long after the task was finished. They did not dance the way people dance at a wedding. They danced the way a hand shakes after it has held something too heavy for too long, involuntary, exhausted, unable to stop. Families tried to restrain their own. It rarely worked. The moment the grip loosened, the feet began again, as though the stopping had cost more than the dancing ever had. The City Council of Strasbourg was not a superstitious body. It kept ledgers. It solved problems the way orderly men solve problems, by consulting experts. And so physicians were brought in, and the physicians, working from the medical understanding of their age, arrived at a diagnosis that reads now like the opening of the second, worst chapter of this story. The affliction, they concluded, was a matter of the blood, hot blood overheated in the body that could only be relieved by more of the very motion that was destroying the dancers. Burned out, they believed, the way a fever breaks through sweat. Acting on this documented medical opinion, the council did something no modern reader expects, and something the municipal records confirm without embellishment. They built stages, they cleared guild halls, they hired musicians, real musicians, paid from the city's own funds to play for the afflicted, on the theory that if the dancers were made to dance properly, with rhythm and structure, the fever would spend itself faster and be done. The music began. Drums, pipes, whatever Strasbourg's hired players could bring to a square already thick with the sound of feet on stone. and for a city trying to solve a problem it did not understand, this must have felt, for a moment, like control returning. It was not. The numbers did not fall, they grew. By the time the city's intervention was fully underway, contemporary accounts placed the count of dancers near its highest point, somewhere close to 400, moving through the streets and halls of Strasbourg at once, day into night into day. The musicians played on, and the dancers did not thank them, did not slow for them, seemed barely to notice them at all, as though the sound were simply one more thing happening to bodies that had stopped taking instruction from anyone, including themselves. Chroniclers of the period, men writing in the plain administrative language of their office, recorded what followed with a bluntness that reads almost as strange as the mania itself. Dancers collapsing mid-step, dancers whose hearts simply stopped from the strain, dancers who did not rise again from the stage the city had built for their cure. Later historians, working backward through what records survive, have suggested that during the worst stretch of that summer, the dead may have numbered in the dozens across the space of days, though this figure, like so much of 1518, resists a final tally. The ledgers are incomplete. The scribes were perhaps as overwhelmed as everyone else. What remains constant across every account is the helplessness of it. A city that had done exactly what its best medical minds advised, and watched that advice make the affliction worse, with no clear mechanism anyone present could identify, and no way to make the bodies in that square listen to reason. There is a feeling every person carries, in miniature, and it is worth sitting with for a moment before we go further. The twitch in an eyelid that will not settle no matter how you press against it. The shiver that runs through you on a warm evening, uninvited, gone before you can question it. The laugh that arrives at a funeral, wrong and unwilled, before your mind has agreed to allow it. For one unbearable second, your body stops answering to you, a stranger wearing your skin, doing as it pleases. Now imagine that second does not pass. Imagine it stretches into a day, then a week, in front of every neighbor you have ever known, and that the physicians cannot end it, and the priest cannot end it, and you, inside your own ungovernable body, cannot end it either. By late August, the council abandoned the music. Whatever theory had justified the stages and the hired players had clearly failed. And Strasbourg, practical to the end, turned to a different remedy, one older than any physician's diagnosis. There was in the regional memory of that part of the Rhine a long-standing association between uncontrollable dancing and Saint Vitus, a martyr whose intercession was already invoked, in folk practice, against nervous affliction and the kind of fits no doctor could name. The afflicted were gathered and taken, some accounts say walked, others say carried, since by then many could barely stand unassisted, to a shrine linked to the saint. There they were given red shoes, a detail that survives in more than one record and that no historian has fully explained, and led through rites of prayer and penance under the shrine's roof. And slowly, not all at once, not with the drama a modern telling might wish for it, the dancing began to lessen. Reports thinned through the first weeks of September. Fewer new cases, fewer names added to the council's account of the afflicted. By the time autumn's first cold reached Strasbourg's walls, the mania that had gripped the city since Frau Troffea's first step into the square had, for all anyone could tell, simply ended. Whether the shrine had done what the guild halls and the hired musicians could not, or whether the fever, whatever it was, had simply run the course such fevers run regardless of what is offered to it, no record from that year can say. The council did not commission a second study. The physicians did not revise their theory of hot blood into something posterity could test. The dancers, once able to walk on their own feet again, seemed mostly to have gone home and said little more about it, the way people often do about the worst weeks of their lives. What was left behind was paper, civic ledgers, chronicle entries, a handful of names, Frau Troffea is among them, remembered precisely because she was first, and a silence where an explanation should have been. Modern scholars have offered their theories since, a mass psychological affliction born of famine and religious terror, weighing on a population already at its limit. A poisoning from grain contaminated with a certain fungus, capable of producing convulsion and hallucination. A wave of extreme collective stress finding in a starving and frightened city no other outlet but the body. Each theory has its defenders. None has ever been proven because there is no one left to examine. No blood left to test. Only the ink of men 5 centuries gone, describing what they saw as best they could. 5 centuries on, the ledgers still sit in archives, the names still spelled out in careful ink, and the questions still unanswered. Some doors once opened simply don't close again. Some stories survive because they're entertaining, others survive because they're true enough to matter. You decide which this was. I've told this one before. I'll tell it again after you've gone.